Thanks for joining. My name is Mike Cohane. We're continuing our learning series with user tasks. So what are user tasks? And why would they be needed in workflow automation? Let's take a look at a graphic. Let's assume we have a workflow that's in the process of being executed. But as a workflow designer, there comes a point in that workflow where I might need a human in the middle. I might need somebody to either approve something or select data from which the workflow can then continue executing. This may be because I'm going between domains of execution and one person may have access and permissions to one domain to make changes, and maybe somebody has access to another. So I can use a user task in the middle of workflow execution to stop and request information from somebody else in order to continue. So what's the flowchart of that look like? If we look at this diagram, we have a workflow that started, and then somewhere along the line, more information is needed. So there is a request for input, a user prompt that is specifically designed into the workflow at a particular location before any further execution can continue. So a user is notified that input is required. That user then comes into the automation space, and there is a section which we'll show where they can see the request, fill out the information, and let the workflow continue to execute. So in this lesson, we'll walk through how to design that and then how this looks when you go to execute. Let's get started. We'll kick things off back in the Meraki dashboard in our automation framework, and we can see here we have our JSON placeholder web service from our previous lesson. We are going to build on this workflow and add in the capabilities to request information through a prompt before a workflow can continue executing. So in this specific example, we were getting information from a web service, and we were prompting the user at the beginning to give, for example, a username in which we return a user's email from the web service. But what if the user didn't know the names of the users? They wouldn't know what to put in when the workflow was first run. We would actually have to go and get the possibility of names and present that to a user, and then the user could select it and continue. That's the goal of this modification we'll be making today. So we'll duplicate this, and that duplication's in progress. We'll go in, and the very first thing we'll do is we'll change the name. So this is going to be called JSON placeholder web service with user prompt. So to tell us that the user is going to be requested for information along the way. Now, where would we want that? As a refresher, we're making a web service request right here. And this is a call to JSON placeholder, which is a web service that returns information based on the type of request we make. The two types we were focusing on in our previous lessons are users and posts. Let's focus just on the user branch now. What we did is we made a call for the users to our request, and we'll get back a list of users. Then what we did is we did two things. In the very first lesson, we did a JSON path query to pull out all the names that were returned. In a second lesson, we built on that and said, we'll pull all the names and the emails, put them in a table, and then iterate over them. That's what this for loop's about. So why don't we start right here and say this is a place where we are going to make a query right in this area to put a prompt up which will present to the user the list of users that we got back from the web service, and we want the user to pick one. All right, let's first find the adapter that allows us to prompt a user in the middle of the workflow. I'll go over here to search and I'll type in prompt, and you can see here we have a task called create prompt. I'm just going to drag it right here in the workflow. So the idea is before we do any kind of match search, I want to get input from the user on which username we are looking for to do the match on. So let's see what this requires for information. So I've clicked on it, and on the right side it says create prompt. So we're going to change this name a little bit and say ask for username to continue. Okay? And we're going to say who do we want to assign that needs to fill out and respond to this. Right now I've only got a couple of users, but you could choose from the different users on your system. I'm going to say administrator. So the administrator will have to respond. Now, what's my prompt title going to be? Please, and this is just a description, contains usernames from web service. All right. Now, let's add a form element. A form element describes a way of designing your prompt, and there's some choices you can choose from. You can make it a checkbox, a text box, or a drop-down. I'm going to select the drop-down. Okay, now what do we want to label when we have a drop-down? We're going to say usernames, because that's what we're going to be presented. Now, we need another field here. We need an array of users in order to run this. All right, let's go back and look at a previous run to understand what this is looking for and what our options are. To do that, let's look at our previous runs of the JSON placeholder web service that we did in the previous lesson. So we're going to go back to our workspace. We're going to click on the Find It web service. I'm going to view that workflow. Now, I could have also gone into run monitoring, and maybe that would have been a better way to do it. But I'm going to say view runs, and we'll look at the last successful run. All right. So we did a web service call, and we got back an output. If we take a look at that and look at our output, we got back a full set of information about different users, their emails, etc. And then we said, okay, we're going to process that. So we came down into the users branch and we did a JSON path query. Now this query was to pull out only the names. So it worked on this body, and if we scroll down, we pulled out an array of all the names. So the JSON path query resulted in a name, a set of names, or an array of strings. Cool. When we read the table from JSON, we wanted to get a new array of just the names, JSON structure of the names and their email addresses. So not an array of strings, but a JSON structure. So that's what the read table from JSON did. All right, so the prompt is looking for an array. So I think what we're saying here is we can go, we've already done this, we have an array of names. This is already in a perfect format for us to use in our prompt. So let's go back to our workflow and make the modifications to use that. All right, we're back in the new web service that we were working on with the prompts. Here's our HTTP request. So we know the result of JSON path query is an array. And if we look at the prompt, and we go back to what is required, which was back here in the form elements, they want an array. Now, this might seem very simple. Let's go in and do a mapping reference to the activities where we're parsing the user branch and did a JSON path query. Unfortunately, JSON path queries themselves in the workflow automation are considered an object, not an array of strings. So we can't map directly to it. How do we get around this? It's very, very easy. We are going to set a variable. We already have a set variable here before. Let's reuse this. So we are going to store the output of the JSON path query in a new variable. So let's erase the ones that are already there. And let's create a new variable to store this in. We're going to want a local variable. So I've gone back out to my palette, clicked on it, and I'm going down to the variables. And I'm going to add a new variable. And that variable is going to be an array of strings. So string array type. I'm going to call that my user list from web service. And that is going to be a local variable. So we're going to save that. And we'll go back in here into set variable. And we're going to use it. So the variable we're going to update is the one we just created, the local variable user list. And we're going to store in that the returned information from the users branch where we did a JSON path query and got the names. So that whole array of names will go in there. Okay, so now we have, let's do a quick validation, see if we have errors still. We have one thing missing. What are we missing? Oh, we have to go in here to our create prompt now and store the variable we just set. So we assigned the variable, now let's use it. So down here again, we're in the prompt. We were going to put the list down of usernames, and the list is going to come from our workflow, our local variable, which is an array of strings. Now let's validate. Okay, good. We're set to go. But before we run the for loop, we're going to have the for loop act on the answer that we got back from the user prompt here. This currently is designed for the user to give the value at input time. We're not going to do that now. We're going to prompt the user during the run. So we need to make that change. And the change is very easy. So if we come down here, we're going to still loop through the table that we got, since that has all the information, the username and the email. It's really on this conditional right here that we need to check now to check against the prompt return, not the original inputted value that the previous service used. So over here in our conditional, we compared the current item against the inputting matching field. If you look here, this was the input. So we're going to want to go back and delete that. Let's get it off of here. What we really want to compare it against is parsing users branch, and then where we ask for the prompt, ask the username in order to continue. And if we come all the way down, the prompt response has the username string in it. So we're going to save that. That is what we're going to compare against. Let's now go delete the user input because we don't need that anymore. So we had an input for matching field, this one right here, but we're not going to use that anymore. So let's delete that. Let's delete it. Now I should have done that a little slower and realized that there was another object in our post branch that was using that input variable. So just to clean it up and make it quick, I'm going to delete the whole post branch just to make this workflow very simple. So we're going to delete this whole line of operational logic, and now this will just work on one user branch. This should validate just fine. All right, we're good. So let's run it and watch what happens. So we're going to go ahead and run. We're looking for the users to come back from the web service. Notice there's no other prompt yet. And we're going to now run. The web request is made. We've come down and done a JSON path query. We've read from our table. We've set up our variables. And now we're paused right here, asking for a username to continue. At this point, the user who we wanted to be notified for input will get a notification. And they will be in charge of now going and filling this out. So where do they fill it out? Remember back at the beginning we talked about these user tasks. When the user comes over here, they can go into here to user tasks. Let's say I'm the administrator. And under prompts, they will see all the requests for action. And here is our workflow right here. To please select a user field in order to continue. You can see that an action is required. So we can just click on this and we'll be put up with a form for the user to select from. This is the array of names we got back from the web service. And here they all are. This was our JSON path query result. So let's take Curtis over here. And that will be our selection. When I save this, this will be given back to the workflow and it will continue execution. So we'll save. All right, that's done. Now, these workflows run asynchronously, so the workflows go off and running on its own right now. Let's go into run monitoring in order to find it. We could go back to the automation page, go into Workspace, find it, and then click on View Runs. But instead, let's go to Run Monitoring. From the Run Monitoring menu, I can find any workflows that have been executed. So I just need to know what to call it. So I'll do a search on JSON. And here it is, our JSON placeholder web service user prompt. Let's find that run. Here it is right here. Again, a couple of ways to get here. This is so easy, I figured I'd show you this. We click on it, and we can look at the execution. So what we'll see is that we came back in, we asked the user here for a prompt. Here's the prompt we gave them. And for the output, right here, we selected Curtis. That is what was fed into our while loop. Now, I don't remember which one of these iteration loops was Curtis. It wasn't the fourth. Let's see if it was, I think it might have been the sixth. Not the sixth. Go one more. Seventh. It was the seventh. There we go. There's Curtis. And there's the email. I don't know why the email is so different than the username, but it is. So that is what was found as a match. And that, if we go to our output and look at our output variables for matching output result, there it is. There's the email address for Curtis. So we've made a modification to our workflow to base our prompts on the information we are getting back from an external source, in this case, a web service. We've interrupted the workflow and paused it until somebody could come and provide that information. And that allows us to run asynchronously and pass control off to other people. And that person has then come in, served up the information that we need. Now, you could think of that if I was doing network provisioning. This might have been an SD-WAN piece of information, some information about my campus setup, or potentially a WAN link IP address that I needed from somebody. So you can imagine how the operational benefits would be here, where people can contribute to the execution of this workflow in piecemeal along the way. In the end, the workflow is continued and we get our outcome that we're looking for. I hope you found this useful. We'll continue to build on these services in our next episode of these learning series. Look forward to seeing you over there.